But wait, you thought I was done talking about controllers, didn't you? Well, that's where you're wrong, because I got plenty more to talk about. So I'm going to be focusing now on more specialized controllers. Controllers that derive from the norm in some way to give you an experience that's completely different, one of a kind. Like controllers like these are the only things that can do that for you. So, I want to start with arcade sticks. Now we've had these for a long time. We've always had these in the arcades especially. But, I don't know, some of you newer gamers might not know this, but Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis had their own arcade sticks too. I know the Happy Console Gamer showed one of his arcade sticks for one of those systems. I think he had one for the TurboGrafx 16. But when I was growing up, this was what I had for Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. These are essentially the same arcade stick from what's that company? ASCIIware. I don't know if I'm saying that right. But to be honest, back then I didn't really use them much. I don't know why. But if I were to use them, they work pretty well. They're just, they don't have the build quality that you might expect from an arcade stick. Like, the joysticks, they almost feel like analog joysticks. There's no micro switches like arcade sticks today have. So they just kind of slide around the place. They don't make any clicking noises, but they do work for what it's worth. And these arcade sticks in particular, they also have turbo switches for the action buttons. All 6 of them. They also have a slow meter, and they have a whole bunch of other crazy crap that I have no idea what it is. There were arcade sticks for all kinds of systems. The PlayStation had one, the Dreamcast had one, the Xbox had one, even the Nintendo 64 and the GameCube had one. Well, I have no idea how to find one for the N64 or GameCube. I just know they're out there. Now, I've already shown you the Neo Geo arcade stick in the last video. And this was the controller that every Neo Geo system came with. Yeah, you had an arcade stick as the norm. Of course, for $600, or was it $700, you really gotta be getting your money's worth. And the Neo Geo was entirely made up of arcade ports. And you know what? Every one of those games was made to be played with an arcade stick, so you might as well use this. Now, these days, with the professional fighting game community and all, we have a lot of other arcade sticks to choose from. We have some from Mad Catz, we have some from 8-Arc. I usually prefer to go with the ones made by Hori. But either way, all the fighting sticks now are made with authentic arcade parts. The exact same parts that they use in arcade machines. And this is from Hori. This one is for the Nintendo Wii. And this is what I always use when I play, say, Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, or Guilty Gear XX, Accent Core, whatever it's called. And this also works with the Wii U as well. I use this when I play Tekken Tag Tournament 2 on the Wii U. And it works wonderful. It's got 4 arcade buttons, it's got a very nice joystick, it's got turbo switches. I don't think any arcade stick these days doesn't have turbo switches actually. This one that I have for the Xbox 360, also from Hori, also has turbo switches on it. It has less buttons though. But I'll tell you, since these use authentic arcade parts now, they're a lot more expensive than arcade sticks were on the Genesis or Super Nintendo. Like this stick, this is a budget arcade stick from Hori. And it still cost me about $75 to get it. And I think I paid the same price for the Wii, although I don't quite remember. But when you're playing fighting games, especially if you're playing on the Xbox 360 or the Wii, these are the kind of controllers you most certainly want to use. And these work great for any fighting game, or any fighting game. I'm sure there's some arcade fighting games that don't work as well with these. But I play all kinds of arcade games with these. Like, I have Final Fight Double Impact on Xbox, and which is essentially Final Fight and Magic Sword. And I always play with this thing. I always play shoot 'em up games like Oda Medius Excellent with the arcade stick. It just works for everything. But this right here is an incredibly special arcade stick. So special, I gotta keep it in the box, because who knows what the elements are gonna do to it. This one, this is a beauty. Let's get a close-up of it. Look at it. It has the nice gloss finish right on the front. 4 buttons. It has the it's a stick, but on the sides, I realize that's backwards. It's not on the other side. This is straight from Namco Bandai. Although they didn't make it, this is actually a Mad Catz arcade stick. It works about as well as the Hori arcade sticks, though. And this one is for PlayStation 3, so I got an arcade stick for everything. But this one is incredibly special. Only 1,000 of these were made. And they were only sold with this limited edition of Tekken Hybrid on the PlayStation 3. For those of you who don't know, Tekken Hybrid is a very special Tekken package for PlayStation 3 only. It's a Blu-ray that features the Tekken Blood Vengeance movie in 3D, and it also has the original Tekken Tag Tournament game in HD remastering of the PlayStation 2 game, which I actually never had when it came out. And it also had a demo of Tekken Tag Tournament 2, which, as of right now, is currently available for any system. It's on Xbox, it's on PlayStation 3, it's on Wii U even. But there was a limited edition of it, which came with a soundtrack. It had an art book. But if you bought the extra special limited edition, which is only on Namco Bandai's website, you get one of these arcade sticks with it. And this blows my mind to this day. Sometimes I don't know why I bought it. This game with this arcade stick cost me over $250. Is it any wonder that I keep this arcade stick in the box? These others are usually out in the open somewhere. I still keep them somewhere safe, but this gets the special treatment. This is irreplaceable. In fact, it's number 20 out of 1,000. That is going to be such a collector's item one day, although I don't think I'm ever going to get rid of it for as long as I use arcade sticks. And as long as I'm still playing on PlayStation 3. But next, I want to talk about light guns. A lot of people know about the NES Zappo, the light gun for the NES, or the I forget what it was called, the Sega Stunner. That was either for the Master System or the Sega Saturn. But this was a light gun not unlike any other. This is for Super Nintendo, the Super NES Super Scope. You hold it like a bazooka, and you just pow, you fire. Although, I never did understand this. The fire button is actually up here, and the button here God knows what this button is for, but this is not the fire button. And there's no trigger up here either. It's a little strange, but I got used to it. Now, a lot of people may remember seeing this in Super Smash Bros. Nintendo actually made this a weapon in Super Smash Bros. Melee and in Brawl, which I always thought was really silly. But I'm still kicking myself for this. The Super Scope did have a scope on it that you could look through, like a sniper rifle or something. I lost my scope. I have no idea where it is. I really wish I knew. But the nice thing about it is you could stick the scope on either the left side or the right side. So if you're left-handed, then you're all set. Now, I didn't have a lot of light guns growing up. The only other one I could get for a while was this Mad Catz light gun for the Sega Dreamcast. There's a couple of games that use this. There's House of the Dead 2, there's Confidential Mission. Right now I only have one game that uses this, Death Crimson OX. And it's an alright game. I just need to get some more games that use this. But I really like this gun. It's about as good as any light gun could be. And there's a slot up here for the VMU, so you could still see the screen. It also has this this weird nub. It's not exactly analog, but you're supposed to select things with this. On the right side, it has the start button, and it has the B button on both sides. So again, if you're left-handed, this thing's got a plan for you. But what about a light gun game, or a light gun that can't be used if you're left-handed? Unfortunately, that's the Namco GunCon 3. I don't have the GunCon 1 or 2. The GunCon 1 was for the PlayStation 1, and the other one was for the PlayStation 2. And they were both made by Namco for games like Point Blank and Time Crisis. The GunCon 3 here is for the PlayStation 3. And as far as I know, this is the only light gun that works with modern day flat screen televisions. But there's only two games that support the GunCon 3. There's Time Crisis 4, which I own. In fact, you can only get this by buying Time Crisis 4, which serves a problem for multiplayer because the second player can't get another of these without buying Time Crisis 4 all over again. But the other game is, I actually forget what it's called. It's another Time Crisis game. It was made for the PlayStation Move, although it also supports this if you happen to own one. And it had Time Crisis 4. It had another Time Crisis game. I think it was Time Crisis Raising Storm or something. It had a completely original Time Crisis first-person shooter, complete with a campaign mode and even online multiplayer. And it had Dreadnought Pirates, which totally has absolutely nothing to do with Time Crisis. It's a light gun game that takes place in a world of pirates. And supposedly the arcade version is incredibly rare. Now this thing works for those games, but right here it also has this, it's like half of the PlayStation controller. It has an analog stick and it has the L1 and L2 buttons, which are called A1 and A2 on this. This is supposed to be for the first-person shooter mode of Time Crisis. But you can't take this part off. So you can only use this part if you're right-handed. If you're left-handed, you're out of luck. You can't use this. I know that sucks for anyone who's left-handed, but if you get the second Time Crisis game, you can just get the PlayStation Move and use that instead. Now, before I talked about the Wii Remote for the Nintendo Wii, and once that really took off, Sony even though they had been insulting Nintendo for this for a while, they decided, once Nintendo saw the cash rolling in, they were going to make a Wii Remote of their own, the PlayStation Move. Essentially, it's the same thing as the Wii Remote. It just, it has more buttons on it. It doesn't have a D-pad. So you can't turn it around and use it like an NES controller. It had the square, X, circle, and triangle of any PlayStation controller. It had this move button in the center, and a single analog trigger, which is actually concave. They made a concave analog trigger for the Move, but not for the DualShock 3. Whatever. It also had start and select buttons on the side, which are actually admittedly, they're very difficult for me to reach. But in place of the nunchuck for the PlayStation Move, it had the navigation controller. This thing had the analog stick and the D-pad, and it also had another circle and X button. It also had the L2 and R2 button, and again, the analog L2 button is concave. My finger never slips from this. Now, if you didn't want to get a navigation controller, you can use the left side of the DualShock controller instead. So you play games like this. But you know what? I actually prefer the navigation controller just because of the concave analog trigger on it. And now, since I have a 360, I have a Kinect, which is just a camera that sits in front of your television. Essentially, your body is supposed to be the controller. But you know what? That thing doesn't work for Jack. I'm sorry, it doesn't. It's a load of crap. The only games that I have that really work the way they should with the Kinect are dancing games. So yeah, the Kinect. If you love to dance, that's for you. Now going beyond that, I'll show you something really strange. Bongo controllers. These are the DK bongos. These were made for the Nintendo GameCube to be used with Donkey Konga, a rhythm game where you bang on the bongos and you clap your hands in front of it in order to play the songs in the game. Now, Donkey Konga, for those of you who know Taiko no Tetsujin, a taiko drum rhythm game from Namco, Donkey Konga is exactly the same thing as that. Now in America, there's also Donkey Konga 2, which supports this, and there's, well, it's not in America, but there's also Donkey Konga 3, which is Japan exclusive. And then there's Donkey Kong Jungle Beat, which is a rhythm-based platformer, a little closer to Donkey Kong Country, that you can play with this. There was also supposed to be a racing game, Donkey Kong Barrel Blast, on the GameCube, and it was supposed to use this, but they moved it over to the Wii, so you play it with the Wii Remote and Nunchuck instead. Personally, I think it would have been cooler to play with the bongos. For racing controllers, I already showed off the Wii Wheel for the Nintendo Wii, which is a serviceable motion-controlled wheel for your racing games. But one day I also found this, the Ultra Racer 64 from Interact, a racing controller for the Nintendo 64. It looks a lot more bizarre than the old N64 controller. It's like a remote control, actually. You have this, you have this wheel controller. You're supposed to spin this around in order to turn, and the C buttons are right on it. And on the back, you have this little trigger, which is supposed to be your accelerator and maybe your brake. The strange thing about this controller is I have never gotten it to work with a racing game. I don't know why. Maybe I'm using it wrong. I don't have the instructions for this thing. But it's supposed to work. It looks pretty cool. Actually, this isn't made by Interact. It's made from Performance, whoever the hell they are. But yeah, for the time being, this is crap too. I don't know if I'm using it wrong, but it doesn't exactly leave a good impression. So, moving on from that, we have flight sticks. Now, oh, screw me. I wrapped the cord around this one. These flight sticks are both USB controllers for the PC. This one, this is the, I don't know, it's the Attack 3 from Logitech. And this is a, what is this? This is a Sidewinder joystick from Microsoft. The Logitech controller here actually has more buttons. The Microsoft controller, this is actually pretty old. I think it's from like 2001 or something, but it still works with my PC games today. Actually, they're both very good controllers. As a matter of fact, I've gotten both of these to work on my PlayStation 3. Yeah, some USB controllers for PC will work on the PlayStation 3. I'm not entirely sure how you're supposed to configure them. I have no way of configuring the buttons. Like, these buttons just replicate whatever button they want on a PlayStation controller. And some of the buttons do absolutely nothing. But when I figure out how to get this thing working the way it should, then I'll tell you one thing. Playing Afterburner Climax from the PlayStation Network, it's a lot better when you have a flight stick. It's a lot closer to the arcade game too. So if you know how to get this to work perfectly with Afterburner Climax, I suggest you do it. Now, these next controllers, they're not really all that special in that they're different from most other controllers, but I thought I'd show them anyway. This is another PC controller. It's a little weird one. This is from Ion, and this is a very, very tiny controller. Like, here, let's look at it compared to a PlayStation 3 controller. It is so tiny. This thing is supposed to be for travel. You just carry it around with your laptop or whatever, and it closes like this. It comes with a retractable USB cable, and you can just open it up again when you want to play some games. It has 4 shoulder buttons right on the top. It has 4 action buttons. It has a decent D-pad, and it works very good. There's no start button though. That's a little weird, so you gotta make one of the action buttons into a start button. And then there's this, a Moga controller. The Moga comes from Power A, and this is supposed to be for Android devices. Say you have an Android smartphone or an Android tablet. Like me, I have a tablet. So you just use this thing to play your Android games, but it doesn't work with all the games. Moga actually has its own app for showing you which games that it works with on the Android store. There's quite a few games that work with this, but there's not a whole lot. Like there's a few popular ones like the Asphalt racing games, and Vendetta Online supports this, and a bunch of Sega games support this, which I really like. Like every Sonic game, well, not every Sonic game. You can't play Sonic Jump with this, but Sonic 1, Sonic CD, Sonic 4 Episodes 2 and 1, they all work great with the Moga controller. And Jet Set Radio works with this as well on Android. It works great. And if you have an Android smartphone, you can flip this little part in the middle up, and you could place your smartphone right here. Now obviously you can't do that with a tablet because tablets are too big. But all in all, this works very well for Androids, and if you jailbreak your Android device, which I have no idea how to do, you could get this working with any Android game out there. And there's some emulators on the Android marketplace that already work with this, although you won't see them in the Moga app. I think I've shown you pretty much every controller I've had, with a few exceptions. I didn't show you any of my Logitech PC controllers, other than the flight stick, because they're essentially the same as the Xbox controller. I didn't show you my Virtual Boy controller, because it's Virtual Boy. I hate that thing. And, oh wait, I forgot something. Here you go, real quick. It's the Wii U gamepad. I do have a Wii U. Here's the gamepad. I think Happy Console Gamer talked about this enough. So now that I've shown you all these controllers, I'd like to ask you all something. And if you're watching this, Happy Console Gamer, maybe you can enlighten us on this too. But if you could make your own very special game controller by recycling parts from other controllers, what parts would you use and why? Now, if I were to do this, and I'd have to decide between a few things. I gotta pick the shell of any controller, the face buttons of any controller, the D-pad, and we'll say, let's say this controller is gonna have all the nuances that modern controllers have. So it's gonna have 2 D-pads, it's gonna have a home button, and it'll have 4 shoulder buttons, with 2 of them being analog. And a start and select button. So, what parts would you pick and why? So, I'll start with the body of the controller, and I would pick the Dreamcast controller. Because more than anything, this controller, I've mentioned before, the handles on the back, they just conform to my hands incredibly well. And like this, I can reach every button just fine. It only has 2 shoulder buttons, but I'm sure I could mod it in with more shoulder buttons somehow. And hell, you know what? Let's put the other shoulder buttons right here, right on the back, so I don't have to move my fingers from the analog triggers. So there you go. Now, for the analog stick, there's no question about this. I need the analog stick from the GameCube. The left analog stick, to be precise. Not the C stick. No, the left stick. The one for basic movement. This is the best analog stick ever. I will defend it to the end. The ridges that keep your finger from slipping from it. The 8 sides on the 8 corners that the analog stick can stick to, the complete lack of dead spots, how quickly that it moves straight back to the center. You can't go wrong with this thing. Now for the D-pad, I would pick the Sega Saturn controller. This thing is just amazing. Well, I wouldn't use the cheap D-pad from this USB controller, obviously. A real Sega Saturn controller. Except no imitators. This thing is just perfect. Yeah, you know, you have the changeable D-pad on the Xbox controllers nowadays. And maybe some people like the old D-pad for some reason. I don't know. This one, but I have to switch it like this for like platformers and fighting games. But why switch to a different D-pad when you have one that can work for anything? Seriously, this thing's just a beauty. Now for face buttons. I don't know about face buttons. There's not a whole lot going on between the face buttons of controllers throughout the years. But, you know what? Since Super Nintendo's my favorite, I gotta go with the Super Nintendo face buttons. Now, these are the only kind where I can find an immediate difference. The Y and X buttons are concave, and the B and A buttons are convex. But face buttons over the years, they've been perfectly fine. No one's really messed up face buttons as far as I've noticed. Even the GameCube controller has great face buttons. But you know, a lot of them get their design from Super Nintendo, so I'm just gonna go with the original. Now, what about analog joysticks? Or no, analog triggers? GameCube. GameCube analog triggers. They're wide, they're concave, so my fingers fit perfectly in them. There's no way they could possibly slip off. This is what works. This is perfection. And for digital shoulder buttons, I guess I'm gonna have to go with Sega Saturn once again. These are also concave, although not quite like the GameCubes. It's really only this side, and then it tilts back down right in front of the controller. But you know what? You reverse the design of the concave controllers, the concave buttons, so that when you move straight from the analog triggers to the digital triggers, your fingers really can't miss them. And for start and select buttons, well, let's lump the start and select buttons together with the home button. Now, I don't know if anyone else has this problem, but sometimes when I play Xbox games, I go and try to hit the start button or the back button, and sometimes I hit the home button by mistake, because the home button is so huge, and the start and back buttons are so tiny, and it's way too easy to hit them. Hit the home button. And they're so close to each other too. And I'm not sure I would go with the plus and minus buttons and the home button on the Wii remote, or any other Wii or Wii U controller for that matter. Now, they're also small. The home button is the same size as the plus and select buttons, which would be the start and select buttons on a Wii controller respectively. But it works fine, but there's a better option out there. And that's, where the hell did I put it? That would have to be the PlayStation 3 start, select, and home buttons. These are just, they're perfect. They're the perfect size. And even the start button is a completely different shape from the square button. The start is a triangle and the square is a rectangle. And the home button, it's a little bigger than these buttons, but it's below these buttons. It's not exactly on the same horizontal plane like with the Wii and the Xbox 360. You can't miss it. Well, you can miss it, but if you're trying to hit the home button, you can't miss it. And, you know, I just realized the Dreamcast shell only has one analog stick,